The whole courtroom laughed before he even reached the defense table. Not a nervous laugh either, the kind of laugh people make when they've already decided who you are. A couple of men sitting in the back exchanged smirks. One woman covered her mouth trying not to grin, and the attorney representing Ashford Steakhouse didn't even bother hiding his amusement. The reason was simple. The man walking into court that morning wasn't wearing a tailored suit or carrying a leather briefcase. He was wearing a wrinkled restaurant uniform, black work pants that had clearly seen better days, and a pair of shoes so worn down they looked like they had survived a small war. His name was Marcus Hale, and after 19 years of serving tables, he looked exactly like what he was, a waiter. The attorney leaned toward his client, restaurant owner Victor Ashford, and whispered something that made both men chuckle. Then somebody in the gallery said loud enough for half the room to hear, "Looks like he got lost on his way to a lunch shift." More laughter followed. Marcus heard every word. He just kept walking. That's the thing about people who spend decades serving others. They learn how to absorb disrespect without reacting. Every rude customer, every bad tip, every condescending remark eventually becomes background noise. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. It always hurt. Marcus simply got good at hiding it. He sat down alone at the defense table, no attorney beside him, no legal team, no stack of expensive binders. Just a manila folder filled with papers he had spent months organizing at his kitchen table. Across from him sat an entire legal team paid for by a restaurant chain worth millions. If you had walked into that courtroom without knowing anything else, you would have assumed the outcome was already decided. Most people did. What nobody knew was that Marcus hadn't come there expecting sympathy. He came because he was tired. Tired of being blamed, tired of being ignored, tired of watching powerful people rewrite the truth simply because they thought nobody would challenge them. And that story didn't begin in a courtroom. It began nearly 2 decades earlier when Marcus first walked through the doors of Ashford Steakhouse. Back then he was 26 years old, recently married, hopeful, and convinced hard work could still build a good life. The restaurant sat on the edge of downtown Greenville, one of those places where politicians shook hands over expensive bourbon and business deals were signed over dry-aged ribeye. Marcus started as a busboy. Within 3 years, he became one of the most respected servers in the building. Customers requested his section. Regulars knew his name. Some families refused to make reservations unless Marcus was working. He remembered birthdays, anniversaries, favorite wines, food allergies, little things most people forgot. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't ambitious in the corporate sense. He just cared. And for a long time that seemed enough. The managers loved him because he fixed problems before they became complaints. New employees followed him around like he was a mentor. Even Victor Ashford used to brag about him whenever reporters visited the restaurant. "Marcus is the heart of this place," he'd say with a smile. Funny how quickly people change when money gets involved. Over the years, the restaurant expanded. New investors arrived. Corporate executives started appearing. The atmosphere shifted. Numbers mattered more than people. Profit mattered more than loyalty. Employees came and went. Managers rotated through offices like seasons. Marcus stayed. Through recessions, through ownership changes, through the collapse of his marriage after his wife passed away from cancer, through the years spent helping raise his younger sister's son after a family tragedy. Marcus stayed. The restaurant became more than a job. It became the last stable thing in his life. Then came the night everything fell apart. It was a Friday evening in late October. The dining room was packed. Every table booked. Every server moving at full speed. Marcus noticed trouble almost immediately. 2 wealthy customers seated in different sections had already been drinking before they arrived. One was a real estate developer named Grant Whitmore. The other was a local investor named Eric Dalton. Neither man liked the other. Most people in town knew that. What started as sarcastic comments across the room slowly escalated throughout the evening. Marcus noticed it. So did several bartenders. So did the hostess station. Voices got louder. Tempers got shorter. By 6 o'clock, Marcus approached the floor manager. "Those 2 are getting worked up," he said quietly. "We might want extra security nearby." The manager barely looked up from his tablet. "They're spending money. Let them enjoy themselves." Marcus wasn't satisfied with that answer. An hour later, things were worse. The insults were no longer subtle. Other customers had started noticing. Again, Marcus warned management. Again, he was ignored. Finally, standing beside a service station between orders, Marcus opened his phone and sent an email directly to senior management explaining exactly what he was seeing. He didn't know it yet, but that email would eventually change everything. Because less than 2 hours later, the entire restaurant erupted into chaos. Because less than 2 hours later, the entire restaurant erupted into chaos. At first, it was just a chair scraping across the floor. One of those sounds that makes everybody instinctively look up from their meal. Then came shouting. Not the kind of shouting people can laugh off, but the kind that instantly changes the mood of an entire room. Marcus was carrying a tray loaded with entrees when he saw Grant Whitmore stand up, so suddenly his chair tipped backward. Across the room, Eric Dalton rose to his feet too. Both men were red-faced, drunk, and furious. For a second, there was still time for someone from management to step in. For a second, the whole disaster could have been prevented. But nobody moved. Marcus set the tray down and immediately signaled security. Unfortunately, by then it was already too late. Grant threw the first punch. Eric responded with a wine bottle. Glass exploded across the dining room. Customers screamed. A server dropped a tray. Somebody knocked over a table. Then suddenly dozens of people were standing, backing away, trying to protect themselves while broken glass scattered across the polished hardwood floor. Marcus didn't run. He did what he'd always done whenever things went wrong. He worked the problem. He helped move elderly customers away from the fight. He guided a family with 2 young children toward an emergency exit. He called for medical assistance after one guest suffered a cut near her eye. Security finally arrived and restrained both men, but the damage had already been done. By the time police completed their reports, several tables were destroyed, expensive wine inventory had been lost, and the restaurant looked like it had survived a small hurricane. Marcus went home exhausted. He honestly believed he had done the right thing. The next morning, he received a phone call asking him to report to the corporate office immediately. Something about the tone felt wrong. When he arrived, 3 people were waiting for him inside a conference room. Victor Ashford sat at the end of the table. Beside him was the regional operations director and a human resources representative Marcus had never met before. Nobody offered him coffee. Nobody smiled. Victor folded his hands and spoke first. Marcus, after reviewing last night's incident, we've determined that your negligence contributed directly to the damages suffered by the restaurant. Marcus thought he had misheard him. My negligence. Victor nodded. You failed to properly monitor guest behavior and de-escalate the situation. Marcus actually laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because the accusation sounded absurd. I reported those guys multiple times, he said. I talked to management twice and sent an email warning everyone exactly what was happening. The operations director exchanged a glance with Victor. We have no record of any actionable warning. Marcus stared at them. For 19 years, he had defended that restaurant. For 19 years, he had worked holidays, weekends, double shifts, snowstorms, power outages, whatever they needed. And now they were pretending none of that mattered. You can't be serious, he said quietly. The HR representative slid a folder across the table. Your employment is being terminated effective immediately. The room suddenly felt smaller. Marcus looked at each face around the table, hoping somebody would show even a little discomfort. Nobody did. Victor wouldn't even meet his eyes. You're firing me? Marcus asked. After 19 years? Victor finally looked up. Business requires difficult decisions. Marcus never forgot those words. Business requires difficult decisions. Funny how people always call something a business decision when they don't want to call it betrayal. Security escorted him from the building 30 minutes later. Not because he caused a scene. Not because he resisted. Company policy, they said. As he walked through the dining room carrying a cardboard box filled with personal belongings, several employees stopped what they were doing and stared. Some looked shocked. Some looked angry. A few looked scared because they understood exactly what was happening. If the company could do this to Marcus, they could do it to anyone. The humiliation might have ended there. It didn't. 2 weeks later, another envelope arrived. This one came from the company's attorneys. Ashford Steakhouse wasn't just firing him. They were suing him. According to the lawsuit, Marcus bore partial responsibility for the property damage and resulting business losses. They wanted compensation. Thousands of dollars. Marcus sat at his kitchen table reading those pages over and over, convinced there had to be some mistake. There wasn't. His final paycheck had also been withheld pending investigation. For the first time in years, real panic started creeping into his life. Bills didn't stop because someone treated you unfairly. Rent was still due. Utilities still arrived. Groceries still cost money. His nephew Tyler, now 17, noticed the stress immediately. One night, he found Marcus sitting alone in the dark staring at paperwork spread across the table. "They're really doing this?" Tyler asked. Marcus nodded. "Looks that way. So what are you gonna do?" Marcus didn't answer right away. Truthfully, he didn't know. Hiring an attorney would cost more money than he had. Walking away meant accepting blame for something he didn't do. Sleep became difficult. Some nights he barely slept at all. Yet during those long nights something unexpected happened. The more Marcus reviewed everything, the more pieces started falling into place. He found copies of the incident reports he had submitted. He located backup emails stored in an old account. He gathered work schedules, communication records, and internal memos. Then something even more surprising happened. People started calling him. First it was Jenna, one of the bartenders. "Marcus," she said, "I remember exactly what happened." Management ignored every warning. A few days later, another bartender reached out. Then a hostess named Lauren. Then a former shift supervisor who no longer worked for the company. One by one, they told the same story. They had seen the warnings. They remembered the conversations. They knew management had chosen profits over safety. More importantly, they were willing to say so under oath. Marcus wasn't used to thinking of himself as courageous. Most of his life had been spent avoiding conflict. But something changed inside him during those months. Maybe it was the injustice. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe after losing so much in life already, he simply stopped being afraid. Every evening after work at a temporary diner job across town, he sat at his kitchen table organizing documents. He watched free legal videos online. He learned basic court procedures. He highlighted evidence until entire pages glowed yellow. Tyler often sat across from him doing homework while Marcus prepared. "You know," Tyler said one night, "they think you're gonna quit." Marcus looked up. "Maybe." Tyler shook his head. "No, they think you're gonna give up. That's different." Those words stayed with him. Weeks turned into months. Depositions were scheduled. Witness statements were collected. The company continued acting confident. Their attorneys filed motions. Their executives spoke as though victory was guaranteed. To them, Marcus was still just a waiter, just an employee, just another ordinary man who lacked the money and influence to fight back. What they never considered was that ordinary people often become dangerous opponents when they have the truth on their side and nothing left to lose. Then finally the hearing date arrived. Marcus woke before sunrise. He stood in front of his closet staring at the few clothes he owned. There was no expensive suit waiting for him. No polished courtroom wardrobe. Just the same work uniform he wore every day at the diner. He considered borrowing something nicer. Then he stopped himself. Why should he pretend to be somebody else? He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't a businessman. He was a waiter. That was the truth. So he put on the uniform, tied his apron strings into a knot before realizing he didn't need them, laughed at himself for the first time in weeks, grabbed his folder of evidence, and headed toward the courthouse, completely unaware that before the day ended, one simple document buried in those files would cause an entire courtroom to fall silent. One simple document buried in those files would cause an entire courtroom to fall silent. By the time Marcus returned to the present and stood at the defense table, the attorney for Ashford Steakhouse was already enjoying himself. He adjusted his cufflinks, smiled toward the jury box, then looked directly at Marcus. "Your Honor," he said, barely hiding his amusement, "Mr. Hale has chosen to represent himself today. He has no legal training, no professional counsel, and frankly, no evidence capable of disputing the facts already before this court." A few people chuckled. Victor Ashford leaned back in his chair looking completely relaxed. From his perspective, the hardest part of the day was already over. Then Judge Raymond Carter slowly lowered his reading glasses and looked down at the file in front of him. "No evidence?" he asked. The attorney's smile hesitated. The judge opened a folder. "That's interesting, because I'm currently looking at 3 separate incident reports submitted by Mr. Hale before the altercation occurred." The room immediately became quieter. The attorney blinked. Judge Carter continued. "Each report is dated, signed, and acknowledged by management personnel." Nobody laughed now. The judge turned another page. "Additionally, I have sworn statements from 2 bartenders and 1 hostess confirming that Mr. Hale repeatedly requested security intervention throughout the evening." Victor shifted in his seat. The confidence that had filled his face all morning began to crack. Then the judge reached the document that changed everything. And most importantly, he lifted a printed email. At 6:17 p.m., several hours before the incident, Mr. Hale sent a written warning to senior management identifying both individuals involved, describing escalating behavior, and recommending immediate intervention. The silence that followed felt enormous. Even the air seemed different. The attorney opened his mouth, then closed it again. Victor's face had gone pale. Marcus simply stood there holding the edge of the table, unsure whether he was breathing. For months, he had worried the evidence wouldn't matter. For months, he had feared nobody would listen. Yet here it was, sitting in plain view for everyone to see. Judge Carter looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Hale, why did you send this email?" Marcus swallowed hard. "Because I thought somebody was going to get hurt." The judge nodded. "And what did you hope management would do?" Marcus shrugged slightly. "The same thing any responsible employer should do. Step in before it became a disaster." For a moment, the courtroom remained completely still. Then the judge turned toward the company's legal team. His voice never became louder, but somehow it carried more weight than shouting ever could. "This court has reviewed the evidence, the witness testimony, and the actions taken by all parties involved. The facts are clear. Mr. Hale acted responsibly. Management ignored repeated warnings. The attempt to shift responsibility onto a long-term employee appears not only unsupported by evidence, but deliberately misleading." Victor lowered his eyes. The attorney stared at the table. Judge Carter continued. "Furthermore, the court finds substantial evidence supporting claims of wrongful termination, wage withholding, and reputational harm." Marcus felt his chest tighten. After months of stress, fear, and uncertainty, he finally heard the words he never thought would come. "Judgment is entered in favor of Mr. Hale." The attorney immediately rose. "Your Honor, if I may." Judge Carter raised a hand. The attorney sat back down. The decision stood. The restaurant would pay lost wages, additional damages, legal costs, and issue a formal written apology. Just like that, the case was over. Yet the most powerful moment happened after everyone started leaving. Marcus was slowly gathering his paperwork when an elderly woman approached him using a cane. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, and something about her face seemed familiar. "Mr. Hale," she said softly. Marcus looked up. "Yes, ma'am." The woman smiled. "You probably don't remember me." Marcus laughed gently. "After 19 years serving tables, there are a lot of faces." The woman nodded. "About 8 years ago, I used to come into the restaurant every Sunday after church. One afternoon, I realized I didn't have enough money for dessert." Marcus froze. The memory returned instantly. A widow who always ordered tea and chicken pot pie. Mrs. Whitaker? Her eyes widened. "You do remember?" Marcus smiled. "Of course I do." The woman reached out and squeezed his hand. "That day you paid for my pie yourself. You thought I didn't notice." Marcus looked down, embarrassed. "It wasn't a big deal." "It was to me," she replied. "My husband had died a few months earlier. I was lonely. I was struggling. You sat with me for 5 minutes and treated me like I mattered." Marcus felt tears gathering in his eyes before he could stop them. The woman smiled warmly. The people in this courtroom saw a waiter. The judge saw character. "There's a difference." Then she turned and slowly walked away. Marcus stood there watching her disappear into the crowd. Later, when people asked him how it felt to win, they expected him to talk about the money. The truth was, the money wasn't what stayed with him. What stayed with him was realizing how quickly people judge each other by appearances. A wrinkled uniform, a worn pair of shoes, a job title, a bank account. We do it every day without even thinking. The people who laughed when Marcus entered that courtroom thought they already knew his story. They couldn't have been more wrong. And maybe that's the real question here. If you had been sitting in that courtroom that morning, would you have seen an ordinary waiter wasting everyone's time, or would you have waited long enough to hear the truth? Let me know in the comments, because stories like this always divide people. Some believe loyalty should be rewarded. Others think business is just business. So where do you stand? Was justice finally served? Or should employers have the right to protect their interests however they choose? Share your thoughts below, and if you've ever been judged by your job, your clothes, or your circumstances before someone knew who you really were, I'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next story.